let's talk a little bit about one of the words, or at least things that everybody always talks about when you're trying to be a more mature musician. It's like, oh, you got all your playing together, but you have to be a good listener, which I 110% agree with. Okay. But let's talk a little bit about really what it is to be a good listener, whether it's in a group context or in like a jam or an improvised context. Like, what are some things to you that make a good listener, either behind the bass or just as a musician?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think the tendency for people is, I'm being a good listener, so I am going to react to everything that I hear happening, or I'm gonna mimic the soloist. Oh, I know the lick he's doing there, so I'm gonna be there with him.
Yeah, that's my lead. Like, actually, I did that one. I remember my first week of like learning how to play in a small group in college.
Yeah,
and great teacher named Joe Jewell, amazing guitar player and teacher who I'm so indebted to. But I was learning to play with a soloist. I'm backing, I'm comping, I'm doing everything, and he'd play something, and I'd play it back. Or then he'd play an idea, and then I'd start playing on top of them, and he stops and he says, "If you Mickey Mouse me one more time," and it really made an impact on me. I'm like, oh, so like being a good listener is not showing everyone, showing the listener and the rest of the band like, yeah, I'm smart enough to hear that and play it. Like,
right. It's just like that cutesy thing we were talking about. Like, don't be cute with your playing, right? Yeah. It's pretty annoying, I think, as a musician to hear that going. I know some drummers that I've played with.
Drummers are the biggest victims of this, I think.
They really are, and I think especially in the jazz, we've talked a little bit about growing up and playing some jazz and stuff, and how that influenced our playing. And I think that has a huge influence on how we listen and improvise. I think with the gig that we're on now with Richie, one of the things we're known for is those jam sections and how we react to each other. So what I was going to say is, playing jazz, you find these drummers who do exactly that, who react to every rhythmic motif that the sax player may play, and then play that back at him. And it ruins the swing. It ruins the groove.
Yeah, it's just put it on the list of groove killers.
Right, exactly. Yeah. So to define listening, it's not. It doesn't mean reacting every time. It means playing something that's supportive to what's going on.
Yeah, and if you're gonna do that, like you really pick the right time to do it. Like it is okay to everything has a time and place. Right. But it's okay if it's gonna generate energy and sound musical, and it's gonna develop and build something, then it's cool. But to turn that into a game of improvising is kind of a silly thing to do. And for drummers, it's just so easy.
Right, yeah.
And that's what we've all done it. So it's like, actually, as you're learning to be a good listener and a good improviser, and supporting a soloist or supporting someone else's improvisation, is really learning how to complement them and interject and support their ideas, as opposed to constantly jumping on top of everything and saying it with them. You don't finish each other's sentences.
Yeah, a lot of the time, what's supportive is doing the opposite of what they're doing and making that contrast.
Yeah, kind of what I was saying earlier.
Yeah, maybe if the soloist is kind of going nuts rhythmically and harmonically, maybe the bass player just starts pedaling a note or something. When
you say pedaling, just say what does that mean?
If you find like a common tone that works over the chord changes that are happening.
So as the changes keep moving, it's the one note that can stay consistent.
Yeah,
and it's actually a great tool. Is to generate energy from the bass and the drums, is to really push that pedal. Yeah. And we'll illustrate that later. But that's a really great tool for helping push a soloist. And I think of it a lot of times like leaders and followers. If someone's got the lead, you're not back there saying the same thing or screaming and yelling. You're interjecting good points. You want to support that person that has the reins at that point in time. So whether so sometimes, like you said, simplifying what it does, especially if someone some of these virtuosic guys, if they have more facility behind the instrument, they start playing really complex stuff. But it takes someone to throw down that pulse or that general outline for what they're playing to make sense. So rather than getting on top of the improvisation and getting in, you may think oh well, I'm playing the same thing, or I'm getting busy too. I'm really in right now. You're to make it in is maybe to simplify and have that make sense. Like you flatter that section.
Right, exactly.
If not, it's just a bunch of notes.
Right, it just turns into like chaos. It's just everybody just doing the same complex rhythmic thing or whatever it is. And then the opposite of that, if a soloist is really taking a lot of space and breath, and especially if it's a slower tempo, maybe you need to like make sure that pulse is still there, so that the song is moving forward, and the soloist can hear those, and the audience can hear those chord changes passing as the soloist is interjecting their ideas, and so the whole thing is cohesive, and it doesn't lose, just feel like, oh, it's lost all its energy. Is this stopping right now?
Yeah.
So I think that would be the opposite of that, but
now let me ask too, just like because we're talking about listening in the context of like improvising and like jazz and stuff. We're talking a little bit of our jazz background, but like now just like playing pop songs or simple songs or working with a vocalist, like what are some certain are there any particular tips or strategies for listening that you apply a lot, like because there's the listening for the sake of art and making art make sense, but then there's also this listening to be appropriate and apply some of the things we talked about. Like what are certain things that you think make a good listener, maybe?
Well, I think, as far as what I listen for, is I really want to pay attention to the melody and who's got the lead, whether it's a soloist or someone singing, or whoever's in that spotlight in that moment, is listening to that, as well as for me, listening to what the drummer's doing, and staying out of the way, or kind of being there to keep the song moving forward. But I think those to me, those are the two big things that I listen to, is like what's happening with the melody, with the lead line, and what's happening rhythmically with the drums, and so that I could put my bass part, my foundational, I consider a foundational part of both of those things appropriately. So I'm supporting rhythmically what's happening, as well as harmonically what's happening with the lead instrument, and that's some of the things I think about.
Yeah, and
I listen for.
I think sometimes for me, and just thinking more in like a popular music context of like maybe even just, let's say, with a vocalist, with a song that someone wrote that has a story. Whether you think that story is good or bad, or sang well or sang in tune, or like or whatever you think, it's listening to, again, that big picture thing of like, am I, or is the person I'm listening to as just a listener, as an audience member, or as I'm listening around to the band, are they reacting to what the principal thing is? Like, are they supporting that story? Are they supporting that melody? And also, are they supporting that person? Because I think there's an element of musicians too that just like take it for granted, like because we're sidemen, like we're not writing the lyrics a lot of the times, like when we're in supporting roles, of knowing that like you have to play sensitively and in a way that's gonna like create that environment for that song, and not overdo it, to play selflessly. So
I've heard it been said many times that you should know the lyrics of the song so that you could play appropriately. If it's a sad song, don't play some cheeky lick over it, and that's certainly part of listening,
but even if you don't know the lyrics too, like I think you can still pick up on the overall feel. And again, it's listening in a way to knowing that what you're doing is serving a purpose, and that purpose 9 times out of 10 should be support.
Right.
So it's listening to know that. And also, like, I think what a good tool for at least the technique that I use for being a listener is, I always say that I've been lucky to where I haven't played with many bad players. So I kind of have a good position in the band to where I want to play in a way that I can hear the people around me, and I want to hear talented people being talented. Right. So like I want to play, decide on grooves, decide on my dynamics and my energy, to play in a way that I can really hear what's happening around me.
Yeah.
So
one thing I sometimes I heard said, I don't know who the quote was from. It might have been Jocko or somebody. I think about it sometimes. It helps me to listen in that way. Is to the quote was something like, "Let your ears float above the band and hear the whole thing as an entirety." And I conceptually, sometimes that helps me to like, okay, I'm projecting myself out there, listening to the whole entirety of everything as if I'm in the audience, or I'm above the band, rather than I'm here as a bass player next to the hi-hat or the ride or whatever, and I'm just listening to how my part fits in with the drums or whatever.
It gets back to translation a little bit too,
right?
I just think overall, like being a good listener is being a sincere listener, and again, it's listening. The more you play, the more you're being active. If you're busy doing, you're lessening your ability to be a good listener.
You can't
you're
talk
not listening.
and listen at the same time, right? Yeah,
totally,
exactly.
So it's just kind of sometimes it's a big slap in the face when you're learning how to listen, because like I find in the evolution of learning anything with music, your ears tend to arrive before you can get there physically.
Yeah, absolutely.
So there's a little bit of that struggle, but the thing that the ears and developing your listening abilities, it's always one of those like, dude, did I really do that for years? You're right. Developing your listening abilities is often a big epiphany of going all right, well now I hear things differently, and you can never unhear something. So it's now I'm always going to react a different way. So if you really want to change as a player, if you're open to always having this ever changing process as a player, really work on your ability to listen and react from what you're listening to, because that's what's going to change you physically behind the instrument.
Yeah, be a good conversationalist.